Hello and welcome to another episode of the ContinuousX podcast, where we solve for X in the SDLC equation. I'm very pleased to announce that Mike and I have a special guest today, Cliff Berg, co-author of the book Agile 2, the Next Iteration of Agile. Welcome, Cliff.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we'll get right into the question, the Socratic question, as you mentioned in the book. What is Agile 2, and why did you and your fellow Agilists decide it was time for a change?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting story, but the pandemic provided the spark because we realized that one of the kind of core messages of the Agile community was face-to-face conversation, and pandemic forced us all to separate. And so it looked like a good time because we felt that message was a little bit too blunt. It wasn't nuanced enough. Face-to-face is important, but written communication is important too. They're both important. And it really goes back to, I like to look back at the 90s when, in 2001, when the Agile Manifesto came out, I was 20 years into my career. And I remember during the 80s being in a lot of projects that were very agile. I mean, complete automated testing, list of features that we worked down, servant leadership, constant collaboration. But then in the 90s, we saw an effort to systematize software development. And we had these methodologies come out, and people tried to turn it into kind of a cookbook process. And we saw procurement approaches where procurement officers would define project structure as like these phased things. And programmers knew that couldn't work, but no one asked them. And because, there were methodologies, coming out from PMI and other places that define this kind of phased approach, we saw a lot of big initiatives that tried to do it that way, and it didn't really work.
Yeah.
And so when the Agile Manifesto came out in 2000, well, actually, extreme programming became popular a little bit before that. And it was kind of a breath of fresh air, even though extreme programming I felt was like too extreme, because extremes usually don't work except in extreme situations. Usually you need balance, you need flexibility, you need judgment. Not everybody do things a certain way, some extreme way. So I didn't like the kind of one size fits all of extreme programming. Everybody should pair, everybody should use TDD. They're good ideas, but they work for some people, not for others. But then the Agile Manifesto came out, and it was the opposite of that. A lot of people don't realize the Agile Manifesto was actually the opposite of extreme programming, because in every phrase, it talks about judgment and balance. We value these things. We value both of these things, but these more than these. But we value them both. It depends how much to do one more than the other. It depends. Mm-hmm. So it was all about balance and judgment, not about extremes. But what happened then is the Agile movement came to be dominated by kind of the extreme narratives that became more and more extreme. And the core messages in the Agile Manifesto were kind of dumbed down. To really understand the Agile Manifesto, you have to be pretty experienced and knowledgeable. And it got applied in more and more extreme ways. And it didn't work that way. We saw a lot of organizations struggle and fail. And I watched for 20 years as people struggled. And then the DevOps movement began as a separate movement that kind of branched off from Agile. I mean, Jez Humble, seminal author of Continuous Delivery, was an Agilist, considers himself an Agilist. But today, people who are in the DevOps community generally know very little about Agile. They know just kind of like some buzzwords. And people in the Agile community, Agile coaches, usually know almost nothing about DevOps. Mm-hmm. That's a huge dysfunction, So there was a lot that was wrong. And we realized that, we didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We thought the core ideas had kernels of truth in them. We wanted to save that. So Agile 2 is an attempt to embrace more recent, more intelligent, more thoughtful and nuanced, judgment-oriented narratives around what actual agility looks like. So books like Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette, who was a sub-commander, and his whole book is about leadership style and how to teach, how he taught his crew to think out loud, and how he watched, but he empowered them to achieve objectives, but he paid close attention. And Nicole Forsgren's book Accelerate has a whole chapter on leadership.
Got that one too.
Yeah, it's an excellent book, and it's data-based. It's not someone's bizarre idea. It's based on data and research.
Right.
So Agile 2 is an attempt to be smarter about these things and to pull in actual research, behavioral psychology, organizational psychology, leadership theory, cognitive science, operations research, and those all meld together with ideas like flow and lean and theory of constraints and so on. So, it's Agile 2 is an attempt to knit those things together into a narrative that's open. I mean, we say very clearly, this is not like a Bible. This is just a set of ideas to keep in mind when you're organizing things. And read everything else. There's a whole library, a world of books on leadership. Read everything. And so we wanted to create a smarter, newer narrative around what agility looks like in complex organizations.
Fantastic. I actually was a part of one of those XP projects back in the
90s?
Long time ago, 90s, yeah. And I actually grew to like the paired programming, but we quickly was like, let's do this for really hard things only. We tried everything, but then we were immediately already going to softening some of that. And the test driven, we went to the extreme of saying you cannot write a single line of code unless it's tested. And so we were like, we're writing lines of code to test getters and setters. I'm like, this is pointless. You know what? So we again had to, but it did get us at least out of some, I think, very bad things things before it. Not everything was waterfall before it, and that's not I hate that comparison because it's a false comparison. There are many other things between Agile and waterfall, and so Agile has always been a good thing to me. Except, there seemed to be a lot of people that were very unwilling to modify it. XP they were more willing to modify it, even though it was more extreme. Agilists seemed to be becoming more extreme in that sense that no, this is the way. This is the only way.
Well, one of the things that I've seen is, from a business perspective, you have to mold that in there. And when people see the extreme programming, format, I'm paying two people for solving one problem. That, from a labor perspective, that gets business people. They don't understand the value of that, and you have to articulate it in a way that they can grasp it and convince people that that's a better model.
It was more about training, though. It was more about hands-on training. Like, you would pair people with knowledge and without knowledge. That doesn't mean they were both always senior, junior. This was database related. I'm really good with databases. I'm not so good with databases. Great. You two pair up and do that. And it was more of a emphasis on training than wasting two people on a single project or a single task.
Yeah.
Pairing is very effective for helping someone to get experience from, benefit from someone else's knowledge about something. It's not a silver bullet. I mean, some knowledge is transferable. Some is not. Imagine if you're a doctor, you're not going to pair with someone with no medical training and then they become a doctor after a few months. It doesn't work like that. If you're an engineer, you're not going to make someone else into an engineer, because being an engineer requires a lot of mathematics and theory, and there's a lot of layers of analytical content that you have to build understandings of in your mind, in terms of the knowledge pyramid.
True. But I'd rather learn engineering from an engineer, or learn doctoring from a doctor. So I mean, there is, but not every engineer is a good teacher.
Yeah, that's true.
So when you got to pairing, and there were people who were just like type, you're not sharing anything with me. You're just taking the keyboard. So it was a risky thing, but it can be good. Is my point. I still thought of it good in some situations.
Yeah,
but not every single product. Not
as a project manager, you look at that and say, well, okay, if you're typing away, I might as well put the junior guy on something more simple, because now I can parallel my efforts, as opposed to not realizing the value of the teaching, to your point. So it could be, anything can be done poorly, is the point.
Yeah, because there's a short-term versus long-term value.
Right.
The short-term value is put the most productive people on the things they're most productive at.
Right.
But if it's possible to train other people, now you have more productive people. And so your speed of getting things done in the future increases. So there's a trade-off of right now versus a month from now, which is a judgment. It could be that what you're trying to do right now really needs to get done right away.
Right.
What if there's a crisis? Apollo 13, right, where, there was an emergency and they had to figure out how to get those people home. No, you put the friggin' smartest people you have on it and give them whatever they need. Everyone else get out of the way. But, if normally you want to balance short-term and longer term, and developing people is really important. That's actually a major thrust of Agile too, is the whole professional development aspect. Today we're worried about retention and having enough people. And, because, a lot of companies, I don't know if this really translates to the government or not, but a lot of commercial companies today are more worried about market share than they are about efficiency or cost.
Agreed.
Because they want to keep their market share. They want to grow their market share. Profit will follow eventually, but market share is far more important because it's your future profit. And you can't have good market share if you don't have agility, if you can't get new features out quickly to stay ahead of your competitors. And in order to get features out quickly, you have to have enough people who have the skills.
Right.
And so, there are three strategies, retention, recruiting, and training. And you really have to approach all three kind of holistically. You can't just, it used to be, 10 years ago, people would just recruit. Oh, we need some people, recruit them. But today there's scarcity, and if you train people, some will leave. Yeah. But at least if you train enough, you'll have the people you need, and you'll retain the market share, which is really what your goal is. So even if you lose a bunch of people you trained, you kept your market share.
I liken it to a sports metaphor with a baseball team that brings up, some of their younger rookies in order to give them experience in the big leagues, because they have to experience that. They can't learn it from a book. They're not seeing the type of competition that they see in the majors. So you have to bring them up, and you got to be risk taking and let that person sink or swim in order to gain that experience, because you're short-sighted if you're always using experienced players.
Yeah, we need to see development of people as strategic, not as a cost.
I think that also touches on your Agile 2 points of leadership, that you can't just put a methodology in place and then let the next task drive it. You've got to have someone being more judicious. You have to have someone leading it, balancing, requirements. Who makes that judgment call that this is all important, I need everyone on it, or this is a good training opportunity, or this is just a regular task. It shouldn't just be up on a Kanban board and I guess I'm next.
Exactly.
Now serving ticket number 4. Oh, okay, great.
Exactly. The Agile community is culturally, the Agile community has a culture. And culturally, it's a little bit anarchistic. I hope this isn't inappropriate. It's a little bit communistic culturally.
Public sector.
It's an anarcho-communist.
I mean, if you really do Scrum the way it's prescribed, it's kind of like a Soviet collective farm, where no one owns, collective code ownership and everyone's the same and everything. But there's a good idea there, but not if it's practiced in the extreme. Collective decision making is good, but not if all decisions are collective all the time. Then you'll never get anything done. There needs to be leadership. Good leaders don't always use their authority. They generate discussion. The transformational leadership model, one of the elements of it that people often forget is intellectual stimulation, asking hard questions, Socratic inquiry.
Right.
How's this going to work? How do we know this is going to work? What happens if? Are we going to get that capability done in the time frame where we really need it? How's this going to all fit together? Right. Let's talk that through. Good leaders generate that discussion, but they also make sure it happens timely. They make sure decisions get made as they're needed, not drag out. If you don't have a collective consensus, at some point, someone has to say, okay, well, let's go this way and just try it. I'm going to decide we're going to try it this way and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, I own it, but it's just a test. There aren't going to be people on the vehicle. It's just a test. SpaceX has a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
51%. If they're 51% certain that something will work, so it will probably work with a little bit of 51% confidence, they figure good enough to try. They put a vehicle on the test stand, no people in it. They put a vehicle on the test stand, they see what happens, or they put the heat shield in the oven and they see what happens with the torch, whatever it is, they try it and they see what happens, So, you need people, you need leaders who keep things moving. Peter Drucker's person of action. If you just rely on a team to develop consensus, it's too slow. It's too slow.
And you don't want the other one being so autocratic, like your analogy with the Soviet farm system. That didn't work out too well. And you had a dictator providing guidance and leadership. So people starved.
The toxic autocratic leader that just says, do this and do that, and I understand it all, but none of you need to. That's dispiriting. It fails to utilize people's brains. And people are afraid to criticize, which we see happening in the geopolitical sphere right now. Good leadership is open, and generates discussion where people can voice ideas and they're not criticized, oh, that's a stupid idea, or your idea didn't win, so you lose standing now. It needs to be a kind of dialectic, intellectual-based collaboration, but then someone needs to decide what we're going to try.
Agreed.
And they need to own it and not blame the team, if it doesn't work out. They just need to view it, well, we tried it, it didn't work out, we learned from that, and now we'll have another discussion, decide what the next step is.
Well, Cliff, I think you knocked that question out of the park. And it's usually longer than we usually have, but it was so fascinating. So I'd like to thank the listeners for this session. Stay tuned for more of Cliff, where we talk, where he mentioned DevOps. We're going to talk about how the Agile 2 movement and the DevOps practices meld, where they differ, and how they join together to make organizations more efficient.